Hi, in this video we're going to be looking at the process of creating an annual accounts workbook. We do this once a year for every client that we have to prepare annual accounts for, and in fact we often might have to do several of these for each client depending on how many client organizations they have. In this example we're going to do some work for a client called What's Fair, and this video, we're just going to cover the introductory stuff, and then there'll be separate videos for each section that we work through, so that you can go back and review information as you need to. The starting point for everything is our Workflow Max job sheet, and so here we see we have a job for this particular work for What's Fair Limited annual accounts, and you'll see, like everything else, there is a set of milestones and a set of tasks. We're going to enter this process on the assumption that we have already requested information from the client and they have sent their responses back. So here you can see we've got a checklist for information going out, and we've checked off the milestone for information coming back, and we've checked off the task that says we've sent it out. That's the starting point for you to pick up this file. There are other procedures and other regular tasks that we do about sending information out, if necessary, as we do, but this particular instruction video is focusing on what happens once you get the response back from the client. And basically we're going to leave Workflow Max for the most part here, and we're going to go into our Excel template, and everything that we do is sort of contained in this step here: prepare work file for annual accounts. So everything that we're doing really focuses in on these 6 points, but in fact there's a lot more work required than just these 6. So we're actually going to leave Workflow Max now and go and actually have a look at what it takes to create the annual accounts workbook. Now, the workbook is an Excel spreadsheet, and the objective of the workbook is to be able to create for us a set of supporting documentation for the accounts that we're going to prepare for the client. And it's an iterative process. We start with the information we have at hand, and as we work through it we might be changing the ledger, adding journals, changing transactions. Then we've got to go back to our workbook, update the workbook, and so on, backwards and forwards a little bit, go for review, come back, make some final changes, and the end result that we're looking for is a workbook that fully supports the balance sheet of the client's financial statements. So keep that in mind as our goal. Our goal is to get from the ledger and the client's responses all the way through to a document that supports the end of year balance sheet. That's our primary objective. Okay, so we always start off with a fresh copy of the business tax worksheet. Always for the appropriate year, in this case 2012. We do update this every year, and I will point out that it does change. When you start to look at last year's workbooks, you'll see there's a lot less information in them. As we get more experienced and better and integrate other procedures, we are constantly changing our templates. So don't be surprised that for the 2013 workbook it will look quite different from this one again. Hopefully not too different, but it will integrate better best practices. Now, we always start with a clean copy, and the reason for that is that first of all, we don't want to copy data from another client because that runs the risk of copying across bad information, but it also means by going back to the original template, which I've got in my Dropbox, BE Client Files Templates 2012 business tax worksheet. By going back to here every time, it means that you're always getting the most up-to-date version of this document, because we do change it even throughout the year. The files that I did a month ago have an older version of this document, and I've since improved it. So always important to copy this document and paste it into the client's file. And so here you can see I've got What's Fair 2012, a folder for year-end accounts to keep them separate from everything else, and we're just going to paste this document into the folder, and then we're going to rename it to make sure we put the client name in here. And I always like to put the year first, and then the client name, and then the document information. Just makes it easier when you're looking at a recent file list to see what the year and client name is quickly. Let's open this document now and walk through the creation of this document for the first time. So we start off with the summary tab, and you'll see here there's a whole bunch of tabs, probably 15 or so on this version of the workbook, And remember, as I said, we do change this from time to time. So as you're reviewing this, when you look at the new version, you might find things different, or new sections added, or different pages. So just keep that in mind, that you might be looking at something that's slightly out of date. In fact, I just updated this morning with a few with another line. So this row here, I added in and changed the workbook to account for, added in a few new task areas down here. So just remember that this data might change, and what you're watching here is some sort of summary information. Okay, the first thing we want to do is fill in the top section here with the name and information of our client. And this information should all come from Workflow Max. Watsphere Limited is the name of the client. It's a 31 March 2012 year end. Is the client GST registered? We can check that by going to click on the client link in your job, Workflow Max job, and it'll tell you down the bottom here under GST whether it's GST registered. Yes, it is. And whether we prepare the GST, we do for almost all our clients. Okay, so we'll go back to, leave that there, go back here. It is GST registered. Is it FBT registered? You probably wouldn't necessarily know that. The best place to start will actually be last year's workbook, which we'll get to in a minute. And then what kind of entity is it? If we go back to Workflow Max, you'll see that under tax and company information, there is a business structure line. And there are different types of business structures that we use. There are organizations or corporate societies, there are sole traders and partnerships, and then there are 3 different types of companies that we have. And if you click this list down here, you'll get the list as it applies to us right now. Most of our clients are companies. We have a few trusts and sole traders. We currently don't have any partnerships, although I'm sure we'll get some over time. And then everyone else is usually an incorporated society. So if it doesn't match one of those 5, just choose other. Now this happens to be a LTC, which is a particular type of company called a look-through company. And so we're going to choose Company LTC. The other kind is a QC company, or a qualifying company, or just a regular company. So we're going to choose Company LTC here. And it's important that we choose the right options here, because later in the document we'll see that the document responds and gives us information based on what we've chosen here. Next question is, which accounting system is used? This particular client is using MYOB for the 2012 year. We have moved them into Xero for 2013. And then the last thing we want to add in here is we want to add in the job number from, wrong version, the job number from Workflow Max. So here if we go back to the job, it's job number 000425. And the only reason we do this is just that if we're having trouble finding it, we know exactly what the job number was later on. Then we want to know the name of the primary taxpayer and the name of their spouse. Now if this is a sole trader, you'd put the sole trader's name in here again. If it's a company, we would usually put the husband and wife in here, or just if it's just a solo, just their name. In some cases we have more than one taxpayer. You could either leave this out and we just do them with individual tax worksheets later on, or we can do the first family here and the second family on another sheet. So most of our clients really is just a family business. So in this case we're going to enter in the name of the client and his wife. And again, we get this information from Workflow Max. If we look in the client screen here, we'll see under relationships we should have the names of directors and the names of the shareholders. It's usually the shareholders we're looking at here. And what you'll see here is this was 2 families, Gordon and Liz Watson, and Robin and Shane Fairbrother, and the Watsons resigned and sold their shares to the Fairbrothers in 2011. So now the company is just owned by the Fairbrothers. Okay, so filled in that information. That's really just header information. We're going to see this show up on various pages throughout the workbook. Okay, so we want to confirm that we actually have the job in Workflow Max and we've got the job number, and we can put our initials in here to say that this is actually completed. The next thing we want to do is look at the content from last year and copy that into this year. So let's go and find last year's file, which will be in the 2011 folder. And here it is. Oops, that's not templates. What do I want here? I want Watsphere 2011. Get rid of that. And it is Watsphere Business 2011 Tax Worksheet. So I'll open that. And in fact, what we're going to do here is we're going to arrange these side by side. So there's last year, and here's this year. And you'll notice that even the covering page, I've added a lot more detail in from the previous year. Now, also remember that because we change our templates every year, you're not always going to find prior year information directly in these work papers. So my advice is just make your best guess. Do your best to try and copy the information in correctly. The best way to do that is to start in the last year's workbook and then to go from there into the appropriate section of the current year workbook. Remember in here that in many cases our goal is to try and summarize what was in the accounts for last year. So in this case we've got some miscellaneous balance sheet information, accounts receivable, RWT receivable, and accounts payable. So let's quickly find the right places to put those in the current year. So the first one is accounts receivable, debtors. We actually don't carry forward historical information for that, so we can leave that alone. Other current assets is where the RWT information is going to be. So we actually don't need anything on that in here either. We'll come back to that later on when we look at the balance sheet. And accounts payable, we also don't record accounts payable roll forward information, so we're actually going to ignore that as well. Here we have inventory, and in this case this is telling us the calculation of inventory. And the fact that it says here we had $4,000 of closing inventory for cricket. So we're going to put in here cricket under prior year $4,000. In some cases you might even want to copy this worksheet and bring it into here, maybe as worksheet C1, in order to roll it forward for the current year. Not always necessary. We can always go back and pull it in when we need it. In this particular case I know that we've written off the inventory this year, so there's no actual point in carrying it forward. But let's just keep moving through the workbook. Here we're up to the accruals page, and that is work paper 01 now. Some things weren't always in the appropriate same order as last year. Okay, so now we want to make sure that we've recorded this year number, and we accrued $38 for ACC last year, so we're going to put that in as ACC, $38 last year. Nothing else to enter here. So as you can see, we're literally just going through the document looking at what we recorded last year. Under Home Office expenses, this information up here at the top, cost of home, total floor space, etc. That information is very useful to carry forward, so we want to carry that information forward onto the Home Office worksheet for this year, which is X1. Here you can see the same type of worksheet. With similar information. The cost of the home is no longer used, so it's just the floor space question. Next page is on motor vehicle expenses. Again, not a lot of information to carry forward here, but you might find some interesting file notes which it might be worthwhile carrying forward. Now, fixed assets is an area that you definitely want to carry forward. There's several ways that fixed assets might be used here. If we're in Xero, using Xero Ledger, then we might be using the Xero Fixed Assets Register. If that's the case, we do not need to retype anything. And all we would simply include here would be a note that says, in fact you could even delete all of this section here and replace it with refer to fixed asset register in Xero, and that would be sufficient. We just attach a PDF of that, give that a reference of J1, and make sure that balances to our ledger, and we'll be done. If we have a fixed asset register in Excel, sometimes we keep those as separate worksheets, and again there is no need to retype something that already exists. So on that basis we would simply again delete this information and say refer to J2, and that would be our fixed asset register, and we'd store that in our client files folder for year-end accounts using a workpaper name J2 to refer to the workpaper name. In this case we have only one item of fixed assets. We could simply copy the spreadsheet and roll it forward to next year. Could make that workpaper J2. Let's just show you how that happens. I'm not going to use it, but we'll show you anyway. Generally speaking, if you right click on a tab, choose the move or copy option, if you've got both workbooks open you can simply choose the other workbook and you're going to say I want to put this before the end sheet, and always create a copy. You never want to delete it from the original. And what that will do now is create an exact copy of this workbook over in the new sheet. You might get a warning message that talks about the fact that there might be range names that are the same, and you'll always want to use the range names in the new workbook, not link them to the old workbook. But in this case, it's copied it over. And again, we might just change this to be J2 fixed asset register, and then we come over here to fixed assets, we delete these rows and say refer to work paper J2. In this case, I'm not going to do that, so we'll actually delete it. So what we're going to do here, because there's only one item, we're actually simply going to recreate it, because it's fairly quick and easy. It was a personal computer, purchase date, its cost price was, assets are recorded excluding GST unless the client is not GST registered. And if it's something that's being carried forward from the previous month, the months to depreciate will always be 12. And what else do we have to enter in here? Opening accumulated depreciation. That comes from the closing accumulated depreciation figure up here, 2277.61. And this spreadsheet is already set up to actually automatically calculate depreciation and the new totals for the assets. So here you can see it's already telling me how much depreciation we're likely to claim for this year. Okay, so that's all we're going to do right now is just carry that information forward. That's all good. Looking at GST, again, there's no information here that relates to historical comparatives that we would necessarily need to carry forward, so we can leave that. And then actually from this point forward, taxable income, IR10A, personal tax summary, etc., that stuff doesn't need to get carried forward either. When we get to the FBT worksheet, if they had it, which they don't, the market value of the vehicle is always useful to carry forward, and we carry forward that to the 04 work paper on FBT as necessary. So here you can see the market value field here. We'd retype that from over here. Okay, now there's nothing else on last year's accounts, last year's tabs that we want to keep. What we are particularly looking for is in this last section, any notes for next year. And if we have any comments, any file notes, any points forward that we need to refer to, what we want to make sure of is that we have copied that information forward into the first few pages of the current year. So here you'll see a section called File Notes, and as we get better at recording our file notes, we want to make sure they get rolled forward from year to year. So hopefully next year it should just be a case of copying any file notes and pasting them into the new year's workbook. Okay, so what we want to make sure of in this particular step under the summary is that we have copied any file notes and any content from the previous year as necessary. And when that's done, you can initial it.